David S. Goyer. He was the writer of the Batman films, the Christopher Nolan Batman films, and he also wrote Man of Steel. And in a recent interview with the Associated Press, he talked a bit about Superman versus Batman. The thing he had to say is a bit interesting, saying that one of the things that has been fun for us is that we've been a bit farther along than I think people realize. So could this mean that the script is almost done, and that maybe they have some casting announcements they haven't told us yet? Of course, the possibilities are endless, but we're just guessing here at this point. Goyer didn't stop there, though. He said, from a fan point of view, we're conscious of that when you're working on things like this. But you can't let yourself be paralyzed by that. By the end of the day, you still have to create something, and if you try and think, well, what would the fans like? Then stop being creative. It's sort of like where does it end? You have to write the story that you want to write and hope that people want to see it. That's right! You stand up for yourself, David S. Goyer. Because as much as we don't want to hear that, and by we I mean fanboy, and I'm not a fanboy, but when I meant we I meant fanboys. But as much as fanboys don't want to hear it, he's right. Christopher Nolan didn't do that, and look what happened. He didn't pander to the fans. He's like, oh, what do you want? And he didn't say that. Although he wouldn't say that because he's British, so he would say it in a British accent. But I'm not going to offend British people. And no good would have come from it if he listened to the fans, honestly. Because if fans, and this is not an insult on fans, it isn't. It really isn't. Because I think fanboys need to accept the fact that a Hollywood studio is not going to listen to you. As much as that hurts, as much as you don't want to hear that, that's the truth. They're not going to listen to you. They're not. And we'll get to that in a second because, there's two David Goyer stories in the news today. But they're not going to listen to you. Get over it. Accept the fact of what David Goyer said. You have to, that he hopes fans can accept the story. That's all I can say. They're not going to listen to you. Just accept it. They haven't accepted it. Anyway, Goyer finally addressed the elephant in the room, quote unquote. Who would really win in a fight between Batman and Superman? Saying most comic book purists would say Batman because he is the ultimate strategist, even though it makes no sense whatsoever. If Superman just flicked his finger, Batman would be gone. Because, Superman has incredible strength. And Batman is only just a mere badass human being. Alright. David Goyer, again, spoke about his and Zack Snyder's approach and veering from the Superman comics in Man of Steel. And he was at the BAFTA and BFI Screenwriters Lecture and explained why he had no problem turning Superman into the person that he was in Man of Steel. Now, if you haven't seen Man of Steel, I'm going to ruin something for you. So if you haven't seen Man of Steel and don't want to be spoiled, although your geeky fanboy friend probably spoiled it for you already, but for the sake of, just in case you didn't have that, for the sake of that, if you haven't seen Man of Steel, don't listen because I want to quote something from David Goyer, and he's going to say something, and it's going to kind of spoil it because you're going to be expecting it, and you're going to be at the whole movie, and then when it happens, you're going to be like, oh, why did it happen? So I want that to happen. Oh, they're going to have that reaction anyway. But just because you haven't seen Man of Steel, here's what he has to say. So we're pretty sure that was going to be controversial. It's not like we were deluding ourselves and we weren't just trying to do something cool. We felt, in the case of Zod, we wanted to put the character in an impossible situation and make an impossible choice. This is one area, and I've written the comic books as well, and this is where I disagree with many of my fellow comic book writers. Superman doesn't kill. It's a rule that exists outside of the narrative, and I just don't believe in rules like that. I believe when you're writing film or television, you can't rely on a crutch or a rule that exists outside of the narrative of the film. Goyer went on to defend his narrative choice by adding that he didn't want to give Superman an easy out, saying, so the solution was, Zod says, I'm not going to stop until you kill me or I kill you. The reality is no prison on the planet could hold him, and in our film, Superman can't fly to the moon, and we didn't want to come up with that crutch. So, he had no choice. If you remember that scene, just in case if that scene where everyone, even in my theater, everyone was really surprised by what happened in that scene. I was surprised what happened in that scene. Not because they went against the comics, because I was just surprised that it happened. And there was no other way out, really. And he's right. There was no prison. Where they could put Zod? They couldn't put him anywhere. Just saying. Superman can fling him to the sun, but honestly, Zod would just probably stop himself halfway through and come back to Earth and destroy another city. I didn't mind the fact that Superman ended Zod the way he did. That is my personal opinion. It is. Because there was no other way. Was there another way? Sure, there was another way. But if it happened that way, the way that other people wanted it to happen, would it have been as shocking? Would it have been as real as what it was? Or wouldn't it have been as real as the way they were making the movie anyway? That could have worded that better. But hopefully you get what I'm saying. It was shocking, and it was a good shock, because it shows that this Superman, this Clark Kent, this Kal-El that we have in this movie now is completely different from the Superman we know in the comics, from the Superman that we know from the TV shows, from the animated films, whatever, what have you. I personally didn't mind that. So, we always joke about how Superman is the Boy Scout of the comic books. Doesn't kill anybody. Big deal, right? That was probably one of the things that everyone liked about him, because he never killed anyone. He was the Boy Scout. When you look at the comics, does it kill anybody? By the way, in the comics, if you're a real Superman purist fan, Superman has killed people in the comics. Look it up. Just saying. He's killed people before. I don't know why everyone made this big deal about how, they completely changed the character. He's not the same person he was. Of course he wasn't. You want to know why? Because if it was exactly the way he was in the comics, we wouldn't like him. I wouldn't like him. And this is something that I've always wanted people to accept, was the fact that, and some people have accepted this and some people haven't. There needs to be some change from the comics and the movies that are adapting them. And I know I'm going to divulge a little bit from the DC and Marvel, but look at The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead comic books are obviously different from the show. They share the same theme and same characters, but they're different. You want to know why? Because if they literally just adapted the comic book into the show, there'd be no surprises. We would know what's coming. People who have read the comic books anyways, they would know what's coming. They would know everything that was going to happen, and it wouldn't mean anything. You wouldn't get anything from it. And that's why I love The Walking Dead, because I've read the comics and I watched the show, and I'm a huge fan of both of them, but I know that when I read the comic and when I see the show, they're two different things. They're the same thing, but they're different. And that's what I liked about Man of Steel, was that, yes, it took things from many arcs from Superman, but it made this character, somewhat more human, and someone who was human but had this incredible gift that, he couldn't use because people would see him as an outcast, yada, yada, yada. But that moment at the end with Zod, I thought that was just a great way to change the character in a way that I don't think any of us would have. I don't think anyone who would ever write a Superman movie would ever change that rule, right? No one would change that rule for Superman, probably. All the Superman purists would want that rule to be intact. But I didn't mind that. I actually like that, because it shows us that this Superman is different from the comics, and this Superman is like everybody else. He's flawed. He's not perfect. He's not the Boy Scout that we all know. He's different. And it's going to change him. And even David Goyer went on to say that he fully expects to explore the repercussions of that decision in further films like Batman vs. Superman. Saying also, our movie was in a way Superman Begins, but he's not really Superman until the end of the film. We wanted him to have that experience of taking that and carrying that through into the next films. Because he's Superman, and because people idolize him, he will have to hold himself to a higher standard. So there's that. So obviously he's going to deal with the repercussions of what happened in that movie. And everyone's saying, maybe if Lex Luthor is in the Batman vs. Superman, then maybe he'll turn, the whole city against Superman and kind of make Superman kind of this rogue bad guy. Who knows? At least they're going to deal with the repercussions. And that's the other thing I like, because I know that decision was made because I know they were going to do something, with it in the next movie or movies. Again, this is obviously debatable. I mean, people have made videos and long videos and written essays and articles about, that decision with Zod. But you know what? I didn't mind it. I had no problem with it. I didn't. Was it surprising? Hell yes, it was surprising. But you know what? That's what makes the character different. And that's what I want in movies. I want that shock value, especially with characters that we know, like Superman. So maybe that's just me.